To become reflective, thoughtful. I'm very optimistic, you know that. As you will have observed, and as Jos also already observed, the agenda is shifting. It has shifted from focusing on methodologies and methods, conceptualization, complexity in the systems, towards thinking more about the agencies. And we have this afternoon people from 4 very important agencies: UNICEF, DANIDA, World Bank and UNDP. And we hope to be able to have a reflection on the ways in which agencies can create the conditions for innovative research and practice. One of the subtexts in several of the discussions we've had in the last couple of days has been, if only we were given the right terms of reference, if only we were given enough money to be able to do all the things that we would like to do. And beyond that, I think, almost an assumption that some of the terms and conditions that are set by contractor bodies constrain the possibilities of doing the kind of work that many evaluators would like to do. So I think that is one of the topics that I would be pleased for the people on this panel to at least reflect on or add to their repertoire. I'm going to invite each person to speak for 10 minutes. And then we will have a brief discussion among ourselves, then open to the floor. I could begin with Colin. Let us go down the table, if that's all right.
Great. Great, thanks very much, Elliot. Let me try to be brief. I've got about 4 points to make, so that's, let's see, 2 minutes to a point, more or less. But to begin really with where Chris started the whole 2 days, which is about posing questions rather than trying to provide answers. So in that spirit, I very much want to pose a few questions rather than try to provide any sort of definitive answer. We were talking, again, the session is very much about research and practices, and it may be that we spent quite a lot of time looking at the research side. Perhaps this session should be a little more about the practices. But I want to go back again to the beginning of yesterday and refer to Bob's presentation and talk not so much about the war, whether it's over or not, but really the landscape beyond where we are at present. And Bob sketched out a very clear depiction of where we need to go in terms of going beyond aid. So I won't repeat all of what he had to say, but clearly the new environment for development is a very complex environment. So the discussion about complexity and multiplicity of actions and actors was very, very relevant. But I don't think we picked up too much of that. I think we spent an awful lot of the last day talking about, in a sense, business as usual, but you know, how do we improve the quality of what we do and what are the pitfalls and so on, rather than thinking about this new development context that we're in, that we will be in shortly, and that I would say that we're already in. People are talking about post-20. Evaluators sit within a university context, which also has a governance context. So when we think, we shouldn't think about evaluators as lone warriors. I mean, Bob was talking about the need for the evaluators to have courage, and one had an image of the lone samurai striding out in the face of inequity. I don't quite see it like that. I see the function as being a profession, but a function which is linked to other structures and other ways, which other actors who constrain and create an incentive framework for those who do evaluation, those who commission evaluation, and hopefully those who use evaluation and support the evaluation function. So I think we have to ask some question. We have to differentiate then amongst the different roles within the evaluation function. Equally, I think we have to think more as we go into the future about who we talk to and how we how we create a profile for the evaluation function. We were talking, I think, yesterday, at the end of yesterday, about incentives and the need to create incentives frameworks. And the enabling environment for evaluation is hugely important. We keep bumping up against the very tangible constraints that we keep bumping up against, constraints of funding, for example. But the only way we're going to move those is to shift the enabling environment within which the evaluation function moves forward. And we shouldn't underestimate the difficulty of doing that. I attended a planning workshop. UNICEF is putting together its medium-term strategy for the next 4 years. And despite the fact that my colleagues, UNICEF colleagues who were talking about the strategy, said, the world is complex, and we know that interventions to achieve results, we need to have various strands of activity which work together. So we know that to improve livelihoods, to improve child survival, it involves a whole range of interventions, not just one single strand of intervention. And yet, towards the end of the day, there was a session on results-based management. Yes, it's still there, hasn't gone away. And it was incredibly simplistic. What our donors wanted to see was a very narrow, tightly defined logic chain, leading to a certain kind of impact at the end of the day. So we really have a big education program if we're going to shift that enabling environment and shift some rather simplistic understandings which are still tied up around the results-based management concept. Let me, I'm sure I've got 10 minutes already, have I? Let me draw to a close. Let me draw to a close with just one other question, really. And although we've been talking a lot about quality of evaluation and evaluation methods and quality in evaluation, we haven't said very much about capacity. And it seems to me that we need to think hard about building capacity, not as something that we do in what UNICEF still likes to call its program countries, but globally. So we need to think about capacity wherever we're working, and how to find ways of building capacity. And as Patricia said this morning, this isn't just a training issue, it's also precisely about trying to build the incentives so that people will invest in their skills and in their capacities. And part of that is about partnerships. So one of the things that UNICEF currently is supporting is a very ambitious alliance, really, called Eval Partners, which is focused on trying to build civil society capacity around evaluation globally. I can say more about that if you like, but let me not.
It's a market where you don't know the product when you try to procure it, so the supply side does not know what actually or where this process will end, and those who are buying it, the evaluation managers, they don't really know what they want. And if you take that together with all these information problems, that could lead to different strategies, risk coping strategies, both on the side of the supply side, the evaluators, and those who are buying the evaluations, the evaluation managers. And you could try to develop a sort of framework to better understand what's actually going on. If there are many stakeholders on the demand side, which often are in joint evaluations, they will also have to make a lot of compromises, and maybe they also even make, and I have specific examples of this, make alliances. Some of them make alliances with those who are actually doing the evaluation. So you have a very complex net of interest and different alliances, strategies. Some are more risk-averse than others, and that would be my arguments, at least in some cases, lead to low quality of the evaluations. But we know very little about this, and I'm not sure, we discussed it over the dinner last night, whether us who are working in the donor evaluation units, will we actually tell inform about our strategies, and will the companies, some are present here, will they be open about the strategies or how they read what the donors or the evaluation units of the donors actually try to do, or will they see it more as a process where different priorities are revealed through the process? So I think there's a huge area which could deserve more interest, and maybe also more in both analytical or theoretical studies, but also empirical studies. What we did in the paper we did last year was to use some sort of principal agency theory combined with an implicit game theory to understand what was going on that market, if it is somewhere. I'm not sure about the time, but before I conclude, I'll just mention something which have striking me during these 2 days. We seem to assume that if you just improve the quality, and we can discuss again what we mean by quality, then the evaluation or the use of the evaluations will also pick up. I'm not sure about that. And if, for instance, if you take, and we also discussed it briefly, Colin and I, both of us are working for political decision makers. They don't care about methodology. They care about the conclusions of the evaluations. And if they were here, for instance, our minister or the head of the DANIDA, they have been here, and they had listened to this war, whether it was over or not, they wouldn't care. I've never been asked to make an RCT, or they don't care whether I use quantitative or qualitative methods when we do our evaluations. So, but of course, each of us will try to, and it was also mentioned earlier today, for some ethical, moral sort of perspective that we want to improve the quality of the evaluations. But we should not be sure that that will lead to more use of the evaluations. And I think it has never been documented that there's any association between quality, no matter how we define it, and the use of the evaluation. But to conclude, I think there's a huge area here, and what I call studies of the market, if you would want to use that concept of development evaluations. And if I'm interested in continuing a discussion about that. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Elliot. Third, I'll pass the microphone to Marie Gaarder, who is currently at the World Bank and until quite recently was at NORAD, but is now settling into Washington.
Yes, in the process of. Just with my previous hat for a second, I just want to say within the NORAD hat, just echo 100% of what Ole said. I think it's very much reflective, at least, of the sort of Nordic bilateral experience.
Yeah, experience.
And maybe picking up, when we haven't really planned this, but picking up on almost the last point that Ole was mentioning. You know, when I saw the title of this session, how to create the conditions for innovative research and practice in impact evaluation, I thought, well, that's not a goal, that's not an objective, that's a means towards an end, right? And I thought, you know, an assumption that I possibly would make is that learning and use is the ultimate goal of evaluation, and what can we then do to improve these? And in particular, what sort of innovative practice, etc., can we use in order to improve the impact of our evaluations? So I want to address really 3 points, and I have some sub-points to each of these areas, and hopefully it fits more or less. First of all, in order sort of to get to a learning institution or improve learning in an institution, you need to understand how people and institutions learn. And in that sense, I would sort of make a case for studying how people and institutions learn. Our second point I want to go into in more detail is to study the factors that inhibit or incentivize actually using impact evaluation in general, but certainly also innovative research and practice in this area. And then final point, a little bit about how we could pick low-hanging fruits where there actually is a demand for innovative practice and research in impact evaluation. So on the first point, we did in NORAD, and it's not out yet, but quite an interesting study of use of evaluations and knowledge products in the Norwegian Development Cooperation system. And since it's not out yet, it's forthcoming. I'm not going to talk much to the findings, But one very interesting finding was and finding and recommendation actually, after in numerous evaluations that all concluded with the same thing, basically, well, in terms of results and impact, we can't say much because there are no data. The very good and concrete recommendation was actually to start requiring from the researchers and the consultants that they name the data sources they would have, or they did actually try to get hold of and didn't find, or they would have liked to have in order to actually address the issue. And this came as a recommendation because that's what was demanded from the other side. It's not, it's not a very satisfying thing to just hear we can't say much. Tell us how we next time around will be able to say something. So there was an actionable type of recommendation. And then one issue is that in addition to surveying people about how they think they learn or about what they perceive to be the barriers or incentives to learning, which is what the first study for the most part did, you can also explore it more directly through experimental evaluation. When I was at 3IE, together with IDS, we initiated an experiment, a randomized controlled trial on the use of different versions of policy briefs in order to see to what extent it impacted the update of knowledge and opinions and whether it led to actions. And I think this is, in terms of innovative impact evaluation, we shouldn't only look at, what else can we do with quantitative evaluations. There's also areas in which this famous or infamous RCT can also be used in other areas. And I would like to make that point. Then there's the latest paper we have on this just came out, I think, last week in the Journal of Development Effectiveness, and the IDS Bulletin has a paper on the same study. And interestingly, just now, the IAG at the World Bank has been asked and has agreed with the bank management to do an evaluation, among others, of the role of tacit knowledge in the World Bank. And I think it's the actual content of this evaluation is still evolving, but the latest title I saw was Learning and Results in World Bank Lending Operations, a review of evidence-based and experiential approaches. So to me what would be interesting is to see then what type of approaches are those, and hopefully that will be quite interesting for this crowd as well, to see what are they. On the second issue of studying factors that inhibit or incentivize impact evaluation, I think the first issue is very, it has been mentioned, and it's non-brainer, but it's actually really something that I felt keenly when I was in NORAD. I think it's also very much present at the World Bank on the operational side, etc. Is the basic understanding of evaluation, and related to that. So this whole issue of assumptions, of actually being able to question your assumptions, and there's a conflict. You're supposed to be a specialist. You're a agricultural specialist or a health specialist, etc. And it's actually it's a mindset, and it's hard to get people to change that mindset from being somebody who comes with a solution to actually questioning: do I really know this? How do I know this? How did I form that opinion? And I think, in fact, the main evaluation can get people to start questioning their assumptions. I think, and this is an assumption of mine, I think we will get much better interventions, much better planned programs. The third issue is the whole recognition of evaluation competencies within an institution. I know that DFID has been doing some very interesting work in this area, recognizing that this is a competencies. You can get credits, you can build up competence in this area, and it's a sort of professional path you can take. That is, at the moment, not really so in the World Bank. You still have to be mapped to a sector network in order to sort of have a career in the bank, in order to get promotion, etc. So, but there is now an ongoing discussion on how to sort of develop these sort of define competencies in evaluation and be able to sort of build up a professional path in this area. A fourth area that I find quite interesting is that this accountability versus learning dilemma. I hadn't realized how strong it was until I came to the World Bank. And I think, at least, and I might have a simplistic view of it still, but I'm less than 2 months into the job, so forgive me if it's too simplistic. I know some people here have many more years in the bank. But part of it is that a lot of the project level evaluations, which are for the main part desk reviews of validating how the implementation completion reports were done, and then there are a sample where they actually go to the field. It comes out in gradings. I think in the UN presentation as well we talked about that. So you have gradings on relevance, efficiency, effectiveness, etc. And typically they might differ and typically be slightly downgraded from how they self-evaluated. And that becomes a huge issue, and it actually seems to stand in the way of drawing lessons. And because there are also lessons learned section, but nobody cares about that. The discussions are always about the disconnect between how the bank evaluated itself and how IG, as an independent evaluator, then looked at it. And the disconnect is usually around the evidence on outcomes and impact. Because and IG very much has the approach that if you haven't shown evidence, there was none. So there's no benefit of the doubt rule. Another issue that I think would be very important and would be sort of an incentive and ease innovative use of impact evaluations is, and maybe I didn't put this the right place in the presentation, but it came up in a discussion here. There's been the discussion of creating a registry, so a registry of impact evaluations, so that you know what's going on and what has already been done in the sector and what else could you do. And this was something that we started out when I was still at 3IE, and I think it would be important to bring that work forward. And finally, on this issue, also the use of systematic reviews and then looking where there are gaps in the evidence. I think would be a very important thing to do in order to sort of decide in which areas we need to do, to focus in impact evaluations, where we have least evidence. Finally, on the picking low-hanging fruits, so where the demand for innovative research and practice is actually present, I find that there are certain areas at the bank right now which are very interesting. One of them is how we evaluate knowledge products. As you know, the bank is trying to see, we're not only a lending operation, we have knowledge products. Sometimes they come packaged into the loans, sometimes, and indeed more and more, it's a standalone area. So in Russia, for example, most of what they do is almost like a consultancy. I mean, they're being paid to provide knowledge products. And there's still a lot of uncertainty as how do you best evaluate those. The other area is, and again there's a demand to learn how to do this better, how do you evaluate development policy lending? Lots of discussions how best to do this. The third area that is particularly exciting, and I was actually on a panel last week with two of the vice presidents in the World Bank that are particularly working they're having some working groups on how to make the bank into a learning and solutions bank, and what needs to be done in this regard. And I think one of the questions that come up is how do you evaluate organizational transformation actions? So, and what I mentioned, I think would be a very exciting, innovative area is, we can do impact evaluations on the ground, but why don't we apply the same rigor to ourselves? So instead of doing sweeping reforms, etc., why don't we try things out? And there are a number of ways one can do that using impact evaluation tools. And then, as a final area that might be worth mentioning is how do you carry out impact evaluations in fragile and conflict-affected states? And that's also an area where there's huge demand. And just to make a little commercial spot for our book. So Uli is an editor, and I'm also providing to a book that is looking at how do you do evaluations in this sort of context. But this is certainly, there's more needed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Oscar.
Thank you, Elliot. We have the tendency to look at the world from our window. So let me tell you how my room is and how the world looks from my window, so that we could share a bit common concerns. The Evaluation Office of UNDP went through a professional peer review of the evaluation function in 2005. That exercise was led by a combination of OECD DAC members and UN members. At that time, Niels Dadelstein was heading the exercise, and they concentrated on three areas. Credibility of evaluation, the independence of the evaluation, and the use of evaluation. And these areas really shaped the evaluation policy that orients our work since 2006. That evaluation policy set really the grounds for an independent evaluation function that reports to the governing body of UNDP, the Executive Board, and also makes a distinction between centralized and decentralized evaluations. Centralized evaluation being conducted by my office centrally in New York, and decentralized commissioned by program units in more than 138 country offices. So that means that we have a body of evaluative work commissioned by program units that accounts around to 700 evaluations conducted per year. And all these are commissioned by these country offices or regional offices to independent consultants like many of you. So what is the role then of the evaluation office? And was mainly to try to set some standards and to adhere to standards of conducting credible and rigorous evaluation. But we have identified that there is still some reports on the poor quality of the evaluations. And we have established a quality assurance mechanism to better measure the quality of this and try to address the shortcomings in the conduct of the evaluations. So while doing so, we have faced with a number of challenges. And that we try to address with a handbook on planning, monitoring, and evaluating for development results. We want to highlight the issue of development results and therefore the engagement of national governments and national counterparts in the establishing of these frameworks. And that is how UNDP country programs are designed in agreement with the national government to see how the support will be provided over a 4-year or 5-year period of time. In 2012, we had a second peer review of the evaluation function. This time a little bit more concentrated on methodology and knowledge management. Two aspects that we thought were necessary to improve. And one of the main recommendations of this second peer review was definitely the need for the evaluation office, as heading the evaluation function in UNDP, to improve its approach to first efficiency, right? Because we have faced some challenges in measuring the efficiency of the operations. And that perhaps relates a bit to the debate on value for money, but from an efficiency perspective. And also the impact orientation of UNDP's activities. As you know, because of policy recommendations, UNDP has moved away from the implementation of direct downstream programs or projects that deal directly with beneficiaries, and has moved more towards a policy-oriented, policy advice function. And in that sense, the UNDP programs, therefore, are more at the institutional and policy level, having a more indirect contribution to the development results. So this indirect nature was one of the reasons why conducting impact evaluation in UNDP was kind of resisted for a long time. However, now, as a result of this new peer review, we are exploring ways in which we can really enhance not only the conduct of impact evaluation, but also with this standard setting function that we have, orient the body of evaluative work that UNDP can do at the country level, also with an impact-oriented approach. And that is why we really treated and we're very thankful for the invitation to this seminar, because I think this event really is a wonderful gathering of different actors and players engaged in enhancing the rigor of evaluation from different perspectives. So, one more trend that we moved lately. One was really strengthening the role of national evaluation institutions in the conduct of our own evaluations. And second, moving from commissioning evaluations, strictly commissioning, to a combination of commissioning and conducting evaluations. So now in the independent office of UNDP, task managers are expected to lead evaluation exercises. And that has, of course, lots of implications, because some may question the independence of this approach. However, others, including myself, are in favor of this, because we were able to then feel the heat of conducting the evaluations in this field of the political economy of conducting evaluations in multilateral organizations. But that is why many of the issues that were dealt today and yesterday in terms of enhancing the quality of evaluations really resonate with our needs. But let me perhaps concentrate on a couple of lessons that I can take home and share with my colleagues in the evaluation office, and that will, of course, need further refinement from our side, and hopefully with the support of yourself. And those are, on one hand, these efforts to improve monitoring and evaluation systems reflect in a concerted effort to enhance the evaluability of programs. And by enhancing the evaluability of programs, we want to move into a more evidence-based, first, identification of baselines, so that the baselines for each project, program, and intervention are really more linked to more solid data, enhancing the quality of indicators, and therefore really trying to strengthen monitoring systems to see if these indicators are necessarily evidence-based, and finally enhancing the quality of the results frameworks. We are also in the process of elaborating a new strategic plan, and as a recommendation of the Executive Board, the new strategic plan intends to have fewer results at a more aggregate level, and those fewer results being able to be traced down through the implementation at global, regional, and national level. But as Jos mentioned in the presentation earlier, we really are facing an aggregation problem, an aggregation challenge. And that aggregation we try to address by starting to rate the decentralized evaluations and add ratings to those decentralized evaluations. And we know that there are other organizations that have already gone through that way, and that sometimes is not a perfect solution because you miss the learning side of it, but at least it would facilitate the synthesis and aggregation of all this evaluative work. However, we are still facing problems in terms of what are the incentive mechanisms to strengthen these monitoring and evaluation systems. We have a good relationship with the governing body, and that really preserves the independence of the evaluation office in UNDP. However, the governing body has not a unanimous voice, and we have also some diversity within our governing body. And we try to establish a better relationship with each country hosting our operations, but that varies from region to region. At the end, we will try to establish stronger quality assurance mechanisms and peer reviews. And for that, I hope we can continue the dialogue that we have initiated in this seminar. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I think I would like to encourage the panel members to talk to each other for a minute or two, partly because there are very obvious bridges between what they were saying. I don't think they colluded with each other or started off by planning to talk in this way. But when I thought how they were addressing the question of how to create conditions for innovative research and practice, they seem to have a fairly common script. And I'd just like to point this out in order for you to disagree with me and each other if you felt like doing so. So I thought that terms like enabling environments and enabling management, political economy, pointing out how institutions learn, these were all different ways of approaching roughly the same thing from somewhat different conceptual frameworks. And you are identifying as a potential research topic these ways in which learning could occur. The second thing that I thought was quite interesting was the way in which you related to the agenda of the last couple of days, so that we've talked a lot about the kinds of programs we're looking at, and we talked about complexity and systems perspectives, giving it a rather concrete expression by identifying fragile states, for example, or identifying post-conflict and identifying humanitarian relief as the kinds of programs that probably are quite difficult to approach evaluatively from the traditional impact evaluation toolkit. You've also given us a whole range of practical, more down-to-earth things like raising questions about evaluation use and different approaches to evaluation use, including skepticism about whether how far it comes from quality, how far it comes from giving the right answers, how far it comes from independence, how far it comes from the evaluability of the program, how far it comes from data sources, how far it comes with the relationship with governing bodies. So that there are, it seems to me, some quite common agendas, both at the general level and at a more particular level that you were raising. And I'd like to give you all an opportunity just to come back on any of the things that others have said that might spark off and wish to add the odd point. Start with yourself this time. If there is anything, don't feel obliged, but if there is anything.
Yes, there was one thing in particular that I wanted to raise or respond. Maybe I believe Ole mentioned it about, and you did also in your summary about the users don't care about quality, etc. And I sort of tend to disagree slightly, I guess, so maybe I didn't agree 100%, because from my NORAD perspective, I saw a certain amount of evaluations that I would say were of rather mixed to poor quality, where even where the operational side actually also picked up on it and started questioning. And it was at the basic level of triangulation is not interviewing 3 people in one embassy. I honestly think there's quite a lot of evaluations at that level, and so people do pick up on those. So I think it's always so. Yeah, that's the main thing I want to make.
Colin? Again, if you feel there's something to add.
No, just to, I mean, I think what we all of us had something to say about was the use of evaluation, and by extension, the users of evaluation, whether it's at the policy level or the programming level. I guess something I would like to put on the table, and something which I think may be particularly appropriate for the Centre for Development evaluation. No, what is it? Impact. Pardon me, the impact word. Given its kind of hybrid nature, would be to extend this discussion to those who actually use evaluations and those who, in a sense, set the authorizing environment for evaluation and make the decisions ultimately about funding of development programs. So, let's engage with that wider community that affects the work that we do and that we hope are users of the work that we do.
Very briefly, maybe a sort of reaction to Oscar. We've learned a lot about causality these 2 days, and in DANIDA we have had all the right guidelines and policies for quite many years. But and that may be sufficient, necessary conditions, but I would call not sufficient conditions. So what I'm arguing, I guess, is that we have to, of course, to do what you are now trying to do, but maybe to push the discussions and here and also in other fora further. And if you don't do that, you will not improve the quality, and I will not again define what I mean by quality. But also when we do these peer reviews, they don't really focus on quality. They focus on procedures and management and all that, but they don't really focus on quality.
But it does remain an interesting point that not always is quality the way to get the use of evaluation, as I think you observed. And that's, I suppose, where professional standards come in. Irrespective of whether the client wants quality, we are assuming that quality is something that we as professionals are expecting to provide. Can I throw it open to the floor, and can I have a show of hands of the people who are in the queue? James? Sorry, I've forgotten your name. James, Jenny, and Dave. Yes, Dave. Yes. Take those three first. James first.
Thank you. I appreciated the shift towards thinking about evaluation as a quasi-market or a market, which of course isn't a new topic, and some of us will remember the New Institutional Economics of Aid, written by Seabright Mummert, probably 10 years ago, where you can find a well-developed general equilibrium model of the undersupply of good quality evaluation within the aid industry, fully worked out mathematically as a low-level equilibrium trap for suppliers and users of aid impact evaluation who have a shared interest in hiding the truth from the public. So, you know, that's there, published for more than a decade. But of course, you know, it is a starting point because it is based on very narrow public choice assumptions. And we all know we live in a much richer, more embedded world. And hence, picking up on this issue of how we make this market work better, we've talked a bit about professionalization. But if we're talking about markets, there's also branding. There's also mergers. We've got new actors, you know, to overcome entry barriers. We've got the Independent Commission for Aid in the UK, which, you know, is public funding of new actors trying to raise quality. We've talked about 3IE. So any thoughts on this issue? How do we build the quality of evaluation in ways not just within organisations by scoring and registries, but, you know, is this a trend that has got more momentum in terms of public validation through reputation mechanisms of what constitutes better and weaker aid?
Thank you. I was interested in something that both Marie and Oscar said, which sparked a thought around the sort of dual role that some of us play within our organisations of both trying to drive up quality of the actual evaluations that are being done at the project and programme level across the organisation, but also trying to encourage take-up. And it strikes me that there are some risks implied in that sort of learning or generating an appetite for learning vis-a-vis trying, you know, the scoring approach or as an effort to drive up quality. So I'd just be interested to hear other people's experiences of how you get that right and what some of the pitfalls are around different approaches to driving up quality and not putting people off.
Thank you. I wanted also to pick up on Ole's description of the evaluation market, which one could describe as the blind leading the blind in some of the ways, Ole, in which you've described it. But it does demonstrate that we have common cause, certainly in this room, although you could say that we are preaching to the converted. So I would want to open up not just should the users be here, but next time we meet, who else should be here? And I made a short list of possible invitees, and I would appreciate some reactions from the panel as to whether any of this list could or should be invited next time round. One group I think that is critically missing from here is procurement people from the organisations that finance evaluation and often operate in an entirely different bit of the organisation to those who actually commission the evaluations. I think there's a set of institutional constraints around procurement that actually fundamentally impact what we're able to do. Obviously managers and users, that would be interesting, go and higher up the tree, politicians, which politicians do we want to involve then, the public, and perhaps journalists. And reflecting on those last two, I showed the thought of inviting the Daily Mail to a conference about evaluation. I don't know if anybody read Bill Gates' article in the Daily Mail last week and then followed the comments list down at the bottom to look at public attitudes to aid. And it would be interesting to explore public attitudes to evaluation because I think if you then join all those dots, you find that the comments on the Daily Mail page in response to Bill Gates' article actually do have a remarkably strong effect on the room for manoeuvre that we have as evaluators of development effectiveness. So, sorry, a very long-winded way of saying, next time we hold an event, whether it's CDI or somebody else, who should we invite and what should we talk about?
Thank you all very much. We have 3 questions, as I understand them: how to build quality of evaluations, how to encourage take-up and drive up quality, and who else should be here if we were to meet again. Yes.
As a react or respond to the first and the third comment, actually, as far as I know, 2 papers have been written, James, not only one from that perspective. But I think my point of departure is completely different. I think we have a problem, and we try to understand that problem. All of us agree that's the problem. We have heard it many times yesterday and today. And we are not really clear on what's going on that market, whatever we call it, that sort of interaction. And as a manager, evaluation manager, I'm interested in getting a better feeling of what's going on. And that could lead to a number of implications or changes. But I want to sort of have more information about how different actors act in that interaction. But for instance, when you mentioned the procurement people, actually in our system, I have my own budget for buying consultants, so eventually I'm deciding who's signing on the budget part of it, not formally, not the legal part. But for instance, procurement rules, that's something to discuss. Should they be changed? Are the present procurement rules we use, at least in the EU system, are they the most appropriate for the challenges we have now? We are moving into a new, as we have heard both yesterday and today, a new aid architecture. Should that be changed? And when I talk about entry, I think one of the problems is actually the procurement rules, which, as we discussed yesterday, if you have a lot of experience, man over 60 years, you'll get 90 or 100% per point in our system. If you're young and not that experienced, but excellent, you may get 70 points. And with the rates we have, the young people never get into the market. That's just one example. For instance, one of the nutritious research proposals, I think it was actually 13 or 14, was on the design of the evaluations. I think very often the design is defined, let's call it that, or discussed throughout the process. And maybe that's the right approach in some cases, but in other cases it's not. And as it is now, in many cases, and that's my interpretation, is that consultants, when they send in their technical proposal, they go for a safe solution because they don't really know what the commissioners want, and then they hope to win the contract, and then in the process they will try to negotiate the design in the inception phase and throughout the whole process. So, and to your question of who should be invited, I think the procurement people, at least in my case, they would be relevant. But I think it would be relevant to have more or less the same group of representatives from these groups here, so we still have this interaction between researchers and us more bureaucrats, civil servants, and those who are actually conducting the evaluations in many cases, although there are different systems.
Thank you. Yes, I would like to comment to this issue of improving the quality of evaluations, and slightly disagree with all that the quality doesn't matter or the methodology doesn't matter. As evaluations in UNDP became more rigorous, they also became more critical of management. And therefore, we felt the pushback. And the pushback forces us to enhance even more the rigor of the next evaluations because we're under spot. And that happened in a sense, including some takers, because there was one particular evaluation that was caught by the media and widely spread about UNDP's performance on poverty reduction area. And so that really triggered a spiral of reactions in terms of the validity of the findings, the credibility of the reports, and so on. And so I think that is a positive spin-off of another type of pressure or demand, let's say, for enhancing the quality of evaluations. I know that your statement was not absolute, but just as for the sake of colonization. And very quickly, before really passing the mic, I would like to reflect on the low-hanging fruits. And there is a tendency in UNDP to conduct impact evaluations where it's more easy to conduct impact evaluations, namely where you have sets of data or where the counterfactuals are more evident, or the types of intervention that would be more susceptible of going through this type of methodologies. But the bulk of interventions does not necessarily reflect that, and therefore there is still the challenge to enhance the methods and the rigor of conducting evaluation, including impact evaluation, in the mainstream of the work done by you. Question.
Yes, I'd like to comment on a couple as well. On the issue of quality versus uptake. I think we don't know enough about it. And what does uptake mean? At what point has a finding actually influenced the policy, and how long does it take, etc. And you might have uptake in a different sector from or a different program, etc. I mean, there's too much we don't know to sort of. So actually, I think that's an interesting research area. We tried to include it in the study of use that I mentioned earlier. Actually, part of that was part of the terms of reference asked for for looking at actually tracing backwards, tracing policy decisions, and seeing whether anywhere along the line did our evaluations that had anything to do with this actually show up, and that somehow fell out along the way in that particular study. So I think that's would be interesting. The other thing is in terms of what we found, we did find from this study, and also from some discussions we had in the World Bank. I think part of the uptake is also related to what extent one engages with the interested parties during the process, and I think that can be done in ways that do not compromise quality of the research. I think in terms of identifying interesting evaluation questions that are relevant for the actors, etc. You can engage on that. It doesn't mean you will take all the questions, but you have that sort of conversation. And a very strong finding from the study was also that when you do dissemination, people do not cite conferences or big dissemination public events as where they actually update their information, etc. They talk about small meetings with peers, small learning events, and I think that's something that we can, one can then use more. And again, I don't think that in any way would compromise the quality. So, on the issue of procurement, I think it came partly out of a conversation over lunch as well. I think it certainly is an issue that at least in NORAD I saw was sometimes hampering the possibility of doing the type of study or research we wanted to do. But I think also it's not only procurement, it's also the way it relates to budgets. So if you wanted to call it, if it's a research contract, it suddenly is a different budget and you weren't allowed to do it, etc. So there are all sorts of practicalities that makes this extremely complicated. And then just one final comment was on the users, for example, the journalists, etc. They are very much the users in Norway of the evaluations there, but it never ever comes out objectively. It's only if you can sort of give it a negative spin. And is any press better than none? I'm not sure. I mean, again, that might be an interesting question to research.
I feel almost duty-bound soon after the death of Carol Weiss to remind us that some of these areas we know a thing or two about, in the sense that direct instrumental use is not something we should ever really expect. On the other hand, indirect, as you were saying, cumulative, unexpected use, reinforcing evaluation cultures and learning cultures are more likely to be the way evaluations are used. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't do them, but we shouldn't necessarily look for a linear relationship between an output and instant learning. Will you add something to that, Barbara?
Yes, I mean, sorry. It's related not just to this, but to some of the points that were made earlier about quality. I mean, is it quality really necessary for use or sufficient? I mean, does it imply use? If we have very high quality in evaluations, does it imply that evaluations are going to be used? And my first thought was that actually there's something called a truth test. It's a theory. It's the references. I have it here. It's Carol Weiss and Bukubalas, 1980. If you're interested, if you're interested, I can give you references. But basically, the theory combines quality of evaluations and novelty value. So basically, the idea is if the results of the evaluation challenge the views of the users, then they need to be high quality if they are to be used. And on the other hand, if something that the users already know, then quality is less relevant. So this is, if you want, I can give you other references, because this is a theory that has been tested with QCA and in a recent contribution to the American Journal of Evaluation.
And it's therefore true.
Sorry?
And it's therefore true.
Yeah, obviously.
I mean, there certainly is a view that one definition of quality is use. But in fact, unless there is use, there is no quality. So, I mean, that's another perspective. Colin, you've got to start to that around. Do you have something you'd like to throw in?
The conversation's moving on, but just to say that I think Ollie's original question is a good one about markets. I think the question about quality and use is a good one, both avenues that we should explore. I just wonder if there's much to learn from our colleagues in policy research, where again, lots of policy research gets done, but not much of it necessarily gets taken up. But they may have done more thinking about this here and at ODI perhaps than evaluators have. So worth looking in that direction. And as regards journalists, there are intelligent journalists.
I never meet them.
There was one at the UKES meeting last year. David Walker did a brilliant job, I think, of situating evaluation in Britain as it was a year ago. Very interesting, very stimulating, and there was a lot for evaluators to learn from his broader view of things.
I agree that Walker is a bit of an exception. I think he's been well educated about all the social sciences. There is a lot known from policy work, and it's very similar to Tara Weiss's work in the sense that time lags are quite substantial. And we shouldn't be surprised that sometimes significant pieces of work become extremely influential some 5 or 10 years after they were initiated. and the networks of the policy shaping community, which absorb knowledge, recycle them through university courses, absorb them in secondary ways, and then it clicks with a certain problem set that is around at the moment. These seem to be the circumstances in which in policy circles people talk about use. Right, I'll take one more round of questions before we shut down. Martin was already in the queue, so he's first kicking off. Can I see a show of hands to get an idea? Robert is second. And Martin is
silent chokes it out. I know you don't want me.
I'm trying not to fall into the familiar trap of not seeing anybody behind the tall people sitting at the front. My problem being a short person, I can't see at the top.
I can't sit at the back.
Was there anybody I was missing back there who will forever hold it against me? Then in which case we will stop with two really good questions. Oh, you're coming in next. Okay, Martin.
Yeah, thanks. I wanted to pick up actually on Marie's point about the accountability and learning, and this is something that came up with Oscar's presentation, I think, as well. And there was a question from John that was asked about the shifting from accountability to learning is fine, but how is it that we measure learning? And I'm not quite sure whether that question was ever really addressed. Maybe that's a question that the panelists may like to address now. And just as a wider issue, I think it's a really good research question to ask about the measurement of learning. Because I think learning is a really important factor in impact evaluation. And I'd like to bring this round to the discussion that we had yesterday about the three different loops of learning. And Marie, when you talked about having to question people's assumptions or trying to bring out people's assumptions around their beliefs and things, for sure, that's your double loop learning. So you've got single loop learning where you're learning how to do things right. And with double loop learning, you're learning what are the right things to do. And there's a counter point to that. Well, and I should say also that learning to do the right things addresses Colin's points, the initial point, right from the outset, about sometimes with impact evaluation, we lose sight of the objectives. I think we need to keep hold of that. Because those objectives are the learning points, if you like. That's what we mean by what is the right thing to learn. I think there's a counter issue around learning to do things right, which is often a sort of an engagement around a learning activity, which is learning to do the wrong things righter. And we very often fall into that kind of trap. And I can't help thinking, forgive me for my neighbour being, but I mean, this morning's presentation around accountability and about the consequence, the causal factors, and the lack of scientific rigour around finding those attributes, essentially, of causal factors. Really interesting stuff, suggesting that, the causal factors attribution is always biased, and essentially we all should really know that by now. I mean, science is biased. It's a value-laden activity. But I got a very uneasy feeling when I then got the kind of recommendation saying, let's put more money, let's put more of our limited resources into trying to make this less biased. And for me, that just figured, are we not trying to learn the wrong things righter, actually, by doing this? I mean, I'm not suggesting that quantitative analysis and randomized test controls don't have their place. They do have their place, they're very valuable, but I think we need to keep that insight.
Robert.
Thank you. I would like to challenge the panel on the subject of innovation and making space for innovation, because I think all of you, to some degree, commission evaluations or influence the commissioning of evaluations. And we haven't talked much about innovation. I think, and I've mentioned this already, but I think that over the past 20 years there's been a gradual swell of quite remarkable innovation in a participatory mode generating statistics. But it hasn't caught on to any great extent for a whole raft of reasons to do with conservatism and lack of time and lack of resources, although EFAD is now commissioning quite a large evaluation which is using these approaches and methods. What we have found is that in a participatory mode, if it is reasonably well facilitated, there's can be an extraordinary win-win. People themselves learn, we learn, commensurable figures can be generated. There is a new sort of rigor which is to do with facilitated process, observed triangulation, and other forms of triangulation. It really recaptures the word rigor, because the data that have come out, and it's in this, a lot of this is in this book, the data that come out have a credibility which is not there with a lot of other forms of evaluation which generate numbers. So it seems to me that there is a win-win here. Now what we have found is that many of the best innovators in this, some of them are in NGOs, and Bernard is here, who's been innovating in this field. Many of them are in NGOs, but many of them are consultants. And what happens is that consultants get commissioned. There's no space for innovation of the methodology, or very little space. And then at the end, there's no incentive to write up. And my challenge to you is, can you proactively encourage innovation when you find a good person or a good group that can innovate in this mode, and give them enough time to develop an ad hoc methodology for the particular task in hand, because that is generally what seems to be needed, and it takes time. And can you then give them time also and encourage them and actually pay them to write it up and to share it? Now those are my challenges to you. Do you think you can do it?
Oh, in a few minutes.
Thank you. Hopefully a fairly short and direct question. It seems to me quite depressing, really, that there's such a concern about the quality of evaluations that's been identified. And it ought to be in all our interests that they're done well, and that the contribution that they make to development is maximised. And as somebody who is commissioned, from our perspective, you as commissioners have a great deal of power and levers over some of those things, both in the procurement process and how you set terms of reference and how you score proposals, then in interacting with us in the design process, in managing the process, in whether you choose to pay us or not. It seems to me that there's actually a lot of levers that you would have to raise the quality of this work if you chose to use them. And I suppose I just wanted to encourage the panel to think a little bit more about how you might do that, or why that's not happening if it's not.
Fine. I saw those questions as really building on the earlier round of discussion in many ways, but the how to measure learning, or how to, I like the idea of doing things right or doing the wrong things righter. I'm not sure about the grammar, but it could catch on, I can see that. And adding to the notion of learning, to how you encourage innovation in others. That seems to me to be a really interesting notion. Well, I know that Robert was also putting it in the context of data and statistics, and more in a participatory frame. And the quality issues and how one addresses those. So, can I throw it back to the panel for any final comments that you might wish to make? Who would like to head off?
Thank you very much, Elliot, and for the very pointed questions. I try to respond to the issue between accountability and learning, and I hope it's not too a simplistic answer, but I really see them as indivisible and I like a dialectic pair, because you cannot fully learn without being accountable, and you don't fully are accountable without learning. So in that sense, it's not really either or, but how the systems then therefore encourage for enhancing accountability and learning. And on the learning side, I think evaluation should really promote a space for reflection. And if that reflection is not necessarily guaranteed just by the conduct of an evaluation, but really how do you create that safe space to accept that things didn't go the way you expected, to identify what were the factors that contributed to that type of performance, and so, and that really goes through a dialogue, internal or external dialogue with stakeholders or not, as many of you mentioned. But that's why I don't necessarily see it as a contradiction.
Years ago, I was forced on a platform to define my position on accountability and learning. Which side are you on, Elliot? And I said, I believe people should be accountable for their own learning. It's the only way I can get out of it. And actually, I do believe that. But in fact, one of the problems about separating accountability or learning is how do we learn to be accountable, and how are we accountable for our learning? Any other thoughts overall, gentlemen?
Just a very brief comment on innovation, at least innovation at UNICEF. Our executive director is terribly keen on it, but he thinks it's all to do with mobile phones, despite the fact that UNICEF actually does lots and lots of social forms of innovation. So the challenge for the evaluation office isn't really Robert's challenge, although that's part of it, I guess. It's actually a slightly bigger challenge to look out there and see what people are already doing in terms of innovation, rather than necessarily stimulating it ourselves from the evaluation end, but nonetheless to get in amongst it, which I think is Robert's challenge. So we'll reflect on that. It surprises me that UNICEF doesn't have a tradition of doing participatory, child-centered evaluation. Save the Children does to an extent, but even there, I think it's not a huge track record. So there's a gap there, which is a UNICEF-shaped gap, I think. Just to say a little bit more, I do wonder, having dismissed information communication technology as a fad and an obsession, actually there's lots to learn from that area, and we have some very smart people working in that area within UNICEF, and they don't use very formal methods of evaluation. They're not particularly worried about quality. They talk about failing fast so that they make progress. So that poses a big challenge for us then to sort of say, well, you failed fast a lot of times and you've made a lot of progress, but actually how much progress have you made and how efficiently did you make that progress and so on. So there are lots of traditional evaluation questions which we should, there's a spotlight we should turn on new ways of doing business. And we stop there.
Very briefly to Robert and to you. I think we need more time for discussing different models for creating space for innovation, but I think I'm attracted to the idea of trying to make space for it. The problem is that when we fund an evaluation, it's also almost always time bound, so they have to provide a report within 18 months or 12 months, and our board or our minister is following the evaluation. So it's very difficult to insert more time. But again, maybe sometimes you should have sort of ongoing research in parallel to the evaluation, or sort of extra component on that. But I think we need to have more time so we can discuss different models for it. But I think something should be done. Just an example, Marie mentioned the book we are working on, and that's a good example of it. We are doing that in our free time. We are trying, because we saw a need for discussion discussion on how we do evaluations in fragile states or in post-conflict situations, and there's almost nothing on the market. So we try now to make a book. But that could also have been done in collaboration with people here and other people. But there we have close researchers and consultants and evaluation managers in the group of authors of that book. And then to you, I would, if I could say just, yes, let's do that, what you're proposing. But my problem is, I think it's much more complex. This interaction between consultants, evaluation managers, the process, and one of the problems is actually this with the insufficient or lack of information when you start out on the process. A lot of things happen in the process which you have to adapt to, and which requires, I would call it a continuous negotiation between the consultants and the evaluators and the evaluation managers. Other agencies than, for instance, DANIDA have chosen another sort of institutional or organizational solution to this. For instance, the World Bank, they have their own team leaders. That's one solution to it, but I'm not sure for a small agency like DANIDA that would be the best solution. But that's why I'm interested in having more discussion or more analysis of this market, this interaction between consultants and evaluation managers. Could I say finally, I'm leaving as head of evaluation within a few months, but still I'm interested in following these discussions.
You'll be able to be really indiscreet because you will be in another job.
Yes.
Briefly, on the challenge from Robert, happy to say actually that we have one ongoing evaluation using those participatory approaches in the I think it's done by Oxford Policy Management, and it's looking at aid as seen from the local population in Malawi. So that would be. So it is possible. In my new job, I'm less sure of to what extent that is possible. I think in a sense, that there's this dual thing. There's IEG, who's the independent evaluation group, that has a certain role to fulfill, and we have to find out to what extent that kind of evaluation should actually be done by evaluation within the organization, as opposed to. But we still have discussions right now as to should we should IG also be involved in impact evaluations, and depending on how those discussions come out, then also these kind of approaches could be a possibility. On the learning, how do you measure learning, etc. was the question, which is a great question. And to be honest, there's obviously no general answer to that. So I think you have to take like specific cases, and it will always be a judgment call. I think in the policy brief experiment that we did, where we actually presented systematic review findings on the effects of different types of intervention from agriculture on nutrition. We actually, in terms of the learning, we had categorized what one would take away from the systematic review, and then we looked at whether people updated their beliefs according to what the systematic review said. That would be sort of your learning first loop, I think. And then the question is perhaps it's not. What about the second loop? Maybe if people didn't update it according to what that systematic review said, they might have lots of good reason, and it's their priors and to what extent they update their priors, etc. And finally, it's the third level of learning is the concept per se. Is the kind of discussion we have here. Maybe some of you go away and think, oh, maybe I should do some sort of impact evaluation of communication methods. Well, that's a certain might be another spin-off. So this is an example. I just don't think we can give a general answer to that. Maybe you do, since you asked the question.
No. Good asking the question and the answers.
Well, in terms of our agenda, which was to identify research agendas and to look at how to create the conditions for innovative research and practice, we have actually had a very fruitful discussion, for which I'm very grateful to the panel and to the audience here. It seems to me that we've identified four main topics or themes. The markets, political economy, enabling environment, evaluation, commissioning and initiation of the relationship between consultants and evaluators and bodies, agencies. That seems to be a very rich area for further thought and exploration. The notion of institutional learning, how people learn. I'm a bit uneasy about measuring learning because it reminds me too much of the exam boards and Ofsted inspections. Maybe I'm too much bruised by that, but certainly understanding learning and recognizing it. I always used to think that learning, we knew learning happened when people applied what they'd learnt, as opposed to merely having the words that they could rhetorically espouse. But certainly there's a second area, the how institutions learn is a second rich area that we identify. There is a third aspect, there is another aspect of that which gets you into the equity question, which is who's doing the learning, and also whose learning is taken seriously, which is the whole participatory dimension that Robert's been raising. And fourthly, there is how does one encourage innovation? How far is it within the power of agencies who are also bound by budgets and timescales and policy imperatives to build into the work that they commission some space for or some incentives for innovation, within which broad ambit I would certainly include capacity development. It seems to me that innovation and capacity development do collide with each other in various ways. So we have a rich agenda. We should be very grateful to the panel, and a show of hands would be most appreciated.